The Shark Deck.
A question for Dave Chappelle. Dave, do you really want to be known as the trans joke guy? Hi, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. I was on Vulture and they were recapping this year's Roots Picnic, and they wrote, "This year's Roots Picnic looks like a convention for some of the most problematic, loudest people in hip-hop. It starts right up top with Dave Chappelle, who will perform what's marketed as a seismic first-ever comedy set of this magnitude backed by the Roots." All right, that sounds pretty cool. And then they tag it with, "Wonder how many anti-trans jokes they'll let him make." And Dave, yeah, like every article about you isn't about what a great comedian you are or how you try to make the world a better place. It's all about how you're dug in on trans jokes. Why not move on, Dave? Just joke about something else. I've talked about this recently when I was back at SiriusXM and around the comedy channels. There's a difference between censorship and choose differently, and I think this is what David Cross was getting at yesterday when I told a story about David Cross. Just choose differently. In your next special, you don't need to dig in and do 15 minutes about trans people just to prove that you won't be quieted. Just, Dave, your whole legacy is going to become this. Move on, buddy. The Roots Picnic takes place June the 2nd to the 4th in Philadelphia. Jason Zinnemann wrote about Richard Belzer in the New York Times. So sometimes I think about this podcast and, all right, why do I host it as opposed to someone else? I'm not a comedian. You know, why are you, Johnny Mac? And I always explain, I know more about stand-up comedy than 98 or 90% of the population. I don't mean that to be like, oh, look at me, I'm cool. It's just I've been working in comedy radio for 20 years now, and over time you learn stuff. But the people that know more about it than I do, and I'll include Jason on that list, know way more than I do about it, and they pay way more attention to it than I do. Jason's one of those guys. So he wrote, "Richard Belzer didn't get famous as quickly as many of his peers, but he was a cult figure with wide influence in comedy. You can hear his clip cadences, not to mention his use of the word babe as a nickname in the act of Dennis Miller, who once referred to Belzer as the Dark Prince of Catch a Rising Star. Andy Kaufman's alter ego Tony Clifton was also partly inspired by Belzer. Notice the glasses," adds Jason. I never knew that. I'm going to go on a tangent here. When I saw the Tony Clifton mention, it reminded me of spending some time with Bob Zmuda. Bob was Andy Kaufman's writing partner, and there are some who think that perhaps sometimes Tony Clifton was played by Bob Zmuda. Bob will never quite admit that, and will refer to Tony in the third person as if there's an actual Tony Clifton out there somewhere who was never ever played by Bob Zmuda. Really? Anyway, I hung out with Bob one day and he was telling wonderful stories, including one which will totally blow up the premise that I just shared with you. So I won't tell that story today, but I remember Tony Clifton was supposed to come up and visit the studios at SiriusXM, and the security in that building is just like ridiculous. It's one of those places where you could be best friends with the security guard, and God forbid you forgot your ID on a particular day. You had to go and sign in and fill out a form, and it's a big headache instead of like, oh, hi, John, who I talk to every single day. Anyway, Tony Clifton showed up, and Tony Clifton did not have any ID suggesting that he was Tony Clifton. It's possible Tony might have had some ID suggesting he was Bob Zmuda. Who knows? But they wouldn't let Tony up, and Tony, in that Tony Clifton way, went over the top, making a ruckus down at security. I had to come down. I think Tony eventually stormed off in character and never came up. Also that week, we had Bob Zmuda up to record a bunch of things about Andy Kaufman, which is why Tony was coming by. And speaking of Andy Kaufman, I forget if I've shared this one on the podcast. If I did, it was a long time ago when there were a lot fewer listeners. Anyway, we were talking about doing something for an Andy Kaufman themed special, and I met his brother Michael Kaufman for lunch. Now, the first thing that happened was Michael was late, and as I was standing there, I was like, is the guy just late, or is this some sort of Kaufman-esque bit? Then Michael Kaufman shows up, and Michael looks enough like Andy Kaufman might if it were the 2010s. And the whole time I'm sitting there eating with this guy who's perfectly nice and wonderful, and we did business together and love him, I'm looking and I'm like, I wonder if this is Andy Kaufman sitting here with me. And I just went down this whole rabbit hole of paranoia. Probably wasn't, but there was enough doubt in my mind to make me go, Anyway, Jason Zinnemann wrote about Richard Belzer in the New York Times. Jason wrote, even as an MC, Belzer was his own star attraction. He became famous for taking an incredibly long time to introduce a comic. In an interview for a documentary that has yet to be released, Belzer recalled once taking an hour and 45 minutes to bring up the next comic. That's amazing. More than any joke, what stands out from a deep dive into Belzer's online comedy was an attitude, impatient, sarcastic, friendly but quick to jab. There was a percussive sound to his running retort to the crowd. Yeah, right, sure. These move-it-along interruptions had a rhythm and sound that was quintessentially New York. When he dove into a familiar premise, his voice could move from dry to wry in a blink, mocking himself. It's no wonder that David Letterman, another ironist, whose attitude perpetually commented on and upstaged his own jokes, booked him so often. Today, crowd work is much easier to see in specials, but also all over social media. But in the 1980s, unless you went to a club, you didn't often find people turning "Where Are You From?" into spontaneous comedy. So it's striking that in his 1986 HBO special, Belzer included plenty of such interactions. He said to one guy from New Jersey, "There's a lot of parts of New Jersey that are very nice. I can't think of any right now." Attention-getting headline from the SF Gate. Former SNL comic David Spade battles illness at San Francisco show. Apparently, Spade was under the weather Friday in San Francisco. He told the audience, "Every joke gets a 10% better reaction because I'm on my deathbed." The Gate writes, Spade's voice was so shockingly hoarse that the audience seemed to give him a pass on multiple jokes that didn't quite land. Wow. Spade battled through his illness thanks to, quote, "some Pink Floyd stuff they've been jamming into me." But the Gate says the obvious effort it took him to deliver each joke didn't exactly make for the best comedic atmosphere. Throughout his hour-long set, Spade stuck mostly to classic comedy topics like the trials of air travel and the annoyance of shopping at CVS. Unlike many comedians these days, Spade did not make the audience lock up their phones before the start of the show. God bless you, David Spade. I have had it with the Yondr pouches. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Enough. But they added, maybe Spade was aware his material wasn't worth stealing. Wow. He did a number of California-specific bits. He mocked meteorologists who insist that recent rains won't help with California's drought, and made an incredibly forced joke about running into rapper Nelly while evacuating from wildfires. The inevitable punchline, "It's getting hot in here." Got a smattering of applause. That is a pretty hacky joke. After a quip about how he can't say the words husband or wife flopped, Spade appeared to admit defeat, telling the audience, "All right, I won't use that joke moving forward." Despite lacking particularly original content, the set was peppered with one-liners that sometimes made the show greater than the sum of its parts. For example, "I don't even know how to drive without texting anymore." That one seemed to make the crowd chuckle in spite of itself. Philadelphia Weekly, they have a really strong comedy section. They caught up with Todd Glass. He was talking about how good comedians support other good comedians, and Glass said, "It's the same now as it's always been. If you want support from fellow comics, you have to give it." During the pandemic, Todd Glass did some work on Zoom and wishes he had actually taken part in some of the drive-in stand-up shows. He said, "The Zoom thing, you begin to tailor your work to the art form itself. I have a comic friend who would smoke a little pot, get high, do 3 minutes, and just tweet that out. The pandemic was about adaptability. I tried to tell comedians this like 6 months into the quarantine. I was doing my podcast with my stand-up sensibilities. You read the room without compromising our craft and move forward. Do what you think is funny. You don't need an audience in front of you to know you're funny. A punching bag is better than nothing when it comes to staying loose and keeping the skill set up. And it's not like I'm grading myself above the curve with an A+. The process was cathartic." From Cairo, a show by comedian Kevin Hart that was supposed to happen on Tuesday was canceled due to, quote, "local logistical issues." According to the organizers, they posted on Facebook, "It's with a heavy heart that we share with you, due to local logistical issues, the cancellation of our Kevin Hart event scheduled for February 21st in Cairo." Now, the Middle East Eye jumped in on this. I'm going to stop here before I tell you the story. I'm really undereducated on this subject. If you have more knowledge about it, please chime in on the social media. The links are in the episode description. As the Middle East Eye analyzes the story, they say Kevin Hart faced a flood of criticism in the Arab world's most populous country for promoting Afrocentrism. The movement seeks to promote the role black people played in history and the creation of Western civilization. Hart's critics, however, accused him of distorting history and robbing Arabs of their claim to the country's ancient past, saying he claimed that black Africans were once the kings of Egypt. This article has a quote that even the article isn't sure where it originated, so I'm not going to repeat it because maybe Kevin Hart never said this. The Middle East Eye says many Egyptians criticized Hart's financial backing of an Afrocentric animation series by the company Black Sands Entertainment, which some have accused of blackwashing ancient Egyptian history. So why was the show canceled? I don't know. Local logistical issues. Interesting note from the Time Record News. City of Wichita Falls officials said extra security precautions will be taken for a performance by Nate Bargatze tonight at the Memorial Auditorium. I was like, what's going on there? Nate doesn't seem like the most controversial comedian in the world. I don't know if it's just a general security thing or if there's a reason, but this was in the Google search as I put the show together today. Anyway, it seems pretty basic. All patrons will go through a screening check with a security wand. Prohibited items include weapons. All right, I think that's reasonable. Backpacks. I get it, but it's annoying. Like sometimes when I travel for work, I have a backpack with a laptop with me. And if I want to go to, say, a Mets game and they're like, no backpacks, then I'm like, no Mets game. Audio and video recording devices, glass cans. What's a glass can? Plastic bottles. There's no comma there. It's glass cans. Plastic bottles, food or beverages, explosives. Yeah, no explosives at Nate Bargatze's show. Probably a good rule. Laser pens, signs, posters, and banners. Joe Rogan is at the Creek and the Cave tonight in Austin. They wrote, Joe Rogan is back, babies, one night only. And I was looking at their venue policy. And Joe, I'm done with the Yondr pouches. Just let people come to the shows, man. It's 2023. I have a cell phone. What am I going to do? I'm going to stand there and hold my arm up for an entire hour and put a low quality version of your workout set at the Creek and the Cave up on YouTube. Even if I do, so what? You're still getting $100 million from Spotify, man. Doors open 1 hour before showtime. General admission seating is first come, first served. Arrive early to secure a great seat, blah, blah, blah. This is a strict no cell phones allowed show. Anyone who brings a cell phone, smartwatch, or any other recording device will be required to place it in a locked Yondr pouch. Anyone caught with a cell phone inside the venue will be immediately ejected. Lineup subject to change. If you hate Yondr pouches, go to buymeacoffee.com/dailycomedynews. Let's stick it to the man and buy Johnny Mac a coffee. $5. Buymeacoffee.com/dailycomedynews and leave me a note saying, I hate Yondr pouches. Let's use at Vancouver tonight. If you're new, this is the Just for Laughs Vancouver Comedy Festival, and what I like to do is pretend you and I are there, and I look at the lineup, and I make some recommendations as to what you and I would go see if we were there. 7 o'clock, Nick Thune. 7 o'clock, Sarah Silverman. 7 o'clock, Jared Freed. Low Key Comedy at 7. Low Key Comedy Show is LA's premier comedy show created by comedians Paul Elia and Matt Rife. The unique off-the-cuff format and secret special guests have attracted sold-out crowds all over North America. Past surprise guests include Jerry Seinfeld, Bill Burr, Eliza Schlesinger. Yeah, maybe when you're in LA, none of them are showing up in Vancouver tonight. So if you're going there and you're like, I don't know, I could see Eliza Schlesinger just popping in. Not going to happen in Vancouver, guys. 8 o'clock, Sunset Comedy. Our show is a woman-run, lively weekly event at an intimate seaside oasis featuring authentic Caribbean food and drinks. Oh yeah, I talked about this in the past. All right. 8 o'clock, S.A. Atawo's Comedy Hour. Improvisers and stand-up comedians are given a specific amount of time to perform whatever they want on stage with inspiration from the audience. Looks like about 10, 12 comedians on that one. All right. 8:30, Campy Comedy, CAMPI, a monthly comedy and drag cabaret show that features the best emerging and professional performers in Vancouver. Bassem Youssef at 9:30, Matt Rife at 9:30, Steph Tolev, Canadian Darling at 9:30. All right. Let's do Nick Thune at 7 o'clock. I don't feel like seeing Sarah Silverman. That'll take us to about 8:30. Late shows, Bassem Youssef, Matt Rife, Steph Tolev. Out of those, I'd probably want to see Bassem Youssef. That doesn't start till 9:30. All right, let's do Nick Thune, grab a couple beers, and go see Bassem Youssef. How's that sound? And from allkpop.com, your home for comedy news, comedian Lee Kyung-shil has been reported to police after making lewd comments about Lee Jae-hoon on the radio. Yes. Lee Kyung-shil was on SBS Power FM's radio program, Cultquo Show. She commented on a shirtless scene in Lee Jae-hoon's new drama, Taxi Driver 2. I wonder if that's a sequel to the Pacino film. Probably isn't, but it's fun to think it is. Said 50 years after the original, Taxi Driver 2 follows around a guy driving a cab in Seoul in 2023. I don't know why we would make that movie. Anyway, Lee Kyung-shil said, you see that space in his chest cleavage? If you drip water down there and drink from it, it's like medicine. It becomes sacred water. The host then jokingly asked her if she was going to drip water on her TV screen and try to do it herself. Well, whoa, relax over there. That comment quickly became a hot topic across Korean media outlets for its sexual nature. And on February 19th, A Yonsei University student reported the comedian to the police, citing the obscene acts by using means of communication under the punishment of sexual crimes. Since the controversy, SBS has removed the portion containing the remarks from broadcast recordings on both YouTube and the show's official website. Lee Kyung-shil has yet to release a comment in response to the matter at the time of this recording. Wow. That's your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. Go Yondr pouch yourself. See you tomorrow. All right, here's the pitch. 5 stories. They're all good news. It's called 5 Good News Stories. No negative news, just good news. Nice, easy way to start your day. Hopefully a smile. Hi, I'm Johnny Mac, host of 5 Good News Stories. You get the premise? There's 5 stories, and they're all good news. It's the number 5 Good News Stories. 5 Good News Stories. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.